Hello and welcome into the KE Report. Shad and Corey here as your host, and we're talking with our friend and colleague Jeff Phillips. Jeff is the president of Global Market Development, and he's also an activist investor in the junior resource space. He partners with about a dozen companies to help consult with them and help them market the story. And Jeff, it's always great to have you on the show. We talked about a month back and just saw each other at the Metals Investor Forum in Vancouver just right at the end of September. And it was a good conference. People were all bulled up. We had a nice meal Friday night in Mixer that went on for about 5 or 6 hours where we got to talk to a lot of folks. And we also had a full schedule at the event. I saw a lot of people talking to you as you're at the Almadex booth and kind of circling around the event. Any key takeaways that you have from the Metals Investor Forum?
Yeah, no, it was great seeing you guys there. And yeah, no, it was very a busy forum. I was there because I had two companies that, I'm an activist investor. I don't really, my main rule is that I'm a large shareholder in those companies. And I have people who follow me who come into those financings with me that are like-minded, tend to have a longer time horizon than just 4 months in the junior market. So we tend to be guys that, are willing to hold our stock for several years as the company develops. So really what I do is advise companies because when they're raising money, it's not really the financing you're doing at the time. It's the next two financings as you make your milestones. And how do you do that so that you're raising capital at higher prices, which is less dilutive to the current shareholders. So, and again, in this space, there's a lot of shorter term players and that don't give the company time to develop. So I had Almadex Minerals there, which is a very unique company, and we can talk about later. And Headwater Minerals, who I think Caleb. Actually, we all had dinner. He was at our table. So Headwater was there, and then a past client of mine, but still a large shareholding, is Gladiator Metals that was also there. But the conference was well attended, one of the better ones. Obviously, we're into a much better market with the price of gold and copper, and and so many things going on in the resource space with the U.S. government writing checks and European governments and strategic supplies and it's almost like we're popular in the resource space. And I think you're going to start seeing a lot more generalists come into this space. Even gold's not really getting talked about that much in the mainstream media. It's just all of us talking about it.
Jeff, since you're so much on the financing front, the last couple of conferences we've been to, there is money literally being thrown at almost all of these companies. Every financing we're seeing is oversubscribed. It's being closed quickly. And now we're not even seeing warrants being issued with any of this. What's your take on this financing environment? But then also, all we hear from companies is we went out to raise, let's say, 2 or 3 million. We have demand for 10 million, so we're going to take a couple million more than we initially came to market for. How do you just rate this overall market when it comes to the financing front?
Well, you've got a much more buoyant market over the last 5 years. I prefer the last 5 years. I've done very well because you're able to pick things of value with good share structure and people and real projects. Now your problem is the real projects and the not so real projects are, all going up. And, the question is, how long does this market last? And again, a lot of players are shorter term in this. So I just got off the phone before this call with Joe Mazumdar, a newsletter writer that you guys know, and we were both laughing that, we prefer when things are slower and you're picking real assets. I was telling Joe, most of these companies, what I'm looking for are share structure and people, and I'm also looking for people that are looking for something meaningful, so to speak, elephant hunters. They're looking for things that can be meaningful tier 2, tier 1 deposits and have real value. And unfortunately, our market, a lot of these people, a large percentage of these companies are really picking up roadkill along the road, and they're trying to make a meal out of it. Not to say some of these projects at higher metals prices couldn't make sense with the right people and structure, but at the end of the day, a lot of people get sick trying to eat roadkill and stew at night. So I don't know if that's a good analogy, but I'm looking for guys that are looking for something meaningful and have a longer time horizon. So it gets more difficult in this market. And I suspect we're going to see if you're liking it to baseball, the gold's in later innings, but that doesn't matter because the junior and the development market comes along later anyway. We're probably in the fourth inning, fifth inning for gold, probably in the third inning for the resource stocks. I can see this going on for multiple years, but you will have a rain delay. I don't know what that'll be. And again, it'd be healthy to see gold and some of these things pull back. And then, you get your short-term players that sell their stock. But I think this is a long-term bull market. So I think that'd be a mistake. I'm approaching this as over the next 2 or 3 years. So.
Well, I think for everybody listening, they're expecting this to have a little bit more length than some of the prior moves we've seen in gold and silver and copper. So hopefully a little more staying power. But one way that you're playing it, and you often partner with our buddy Rick Rule on financings, is you like to look at the prospect generator model, Jeff. So we can dig into a couple of companies. Let's maybe kick it off with Headwater Gold. They're traded on the CSE under the ticker HWG. We did have a nice meal on Friday night at the event with Caleb Stroop, the CEO, and they're in an interesting position in that, like you say, they're not going for roadkill. They're going for swing for the fences, very large tier one targets. They're partnered with Newmont and Oceana Gold. Centerra Gold's in there as a stakeholder. You guys are in there as stakeholders. What attracts you to the business model of prospect generators, and what attracts you to Headwater Gold?
All right, first off, yeah, Rick started me in the business indirectly. I kind of worked for Rick 30 years ago, and Rick and I have been friends for a long time. I do all kinds of deals. Rick, as you know, is a huge prospect generator believer, and he's going to do a much better interview than I am on prospect generators and why his odds of success go up and why, some people consider them boring, but the opposite of boring is terrifying. And he'd rather be bored. I like being terrified too, just so you guys know. I've got 6 companies drilling right now, but I do like prospect generators. All companies come down before I even get to the model or the commodity. I'm looking at companies that it's share structure and people again. And when I talk about share structure, how much insider ownership does management own? Are there other reporting insiders, large shareholders like myself, or entities like you mentioned, Centerra, and we'll get into Headwater? Are there other reporting shareholders that have a long time horizon? I want to see a lot of that stock being sold to people that are looking to make a discovery, not flip their stock in 4 months for a warrant or whatever else. So, share structure and people. So since we're going to focus on my section of the portfolio that again, and Rick and I have done a couple of deals. There are deals that I invited him into because he loves prospect generators and they're great deals and great people and great structures. So the company you brought up is Headwater, and Caleb is in charge of that. Management in that company owns 30% of the company. So that's fully reporting. So that's the Quest group that has 4 or 5 companies, and they're all set up the same way, where management's only going to benefit if they make a major discovery. So that's the first thing I look for, whether it's a prospect generator or not. The second thing is that they've also got some key shareholders. Obviously, Rick and I came in, I was already a large shareholder, and then Rick came into a financing with me recently that I led, and he was the other lead order. And, again, the prospect generator model, and it can be defined differently, but it's essentially, instead of spending all your money drilling your own projects, it's advancing those projects to a certain point, and everybody has a different point, but they're basically joint venturing those projects out. So at the project level, they are bringing in a partner, and that partner is spending X amount of dollars over a period of years to earn into 60, 70, 80% of the project. Your risk goes down because, it depends on your partners, obviously, but your risk goes down because if you have in the prospect generator model, there's people that are better at running it than others. But the more prospects you have generated out and the more deep pocket partners you have, you're diluting your shareholders less because you don't have to raise all this money to drill because the partner is doing that. So in Headwater's case, it's probably one of the better prospect generators for their partners. As you mentioned, Newmont's just I think in the last week went to phase 2 on the 2 projects that they're joint ventured on. I think Headwater has 11 projects in Nevada and Idaho, but 2 of those projects are joint ventured to Newmont. And Newmont just went to the phase 2 earn-in, which they don't have to spend it, but in order to earn another piece of the property, they've got to spend, I think it's 40 million US over the next 3 years. That's not a guarantee they will do that, but they're going to be drilling again soon. They've had success in the past. That's not dilutive to Headwater shareholders, and if they make a big discovery, we still have a big piece of that. They've also recently brought in Oceana Gold on 3 other projects in Nevada. And Oceana Gold is another, it's a large spend to earn in. They'll be doing drilling. I don't know if it'll be later this year or early next year on those projects. They're already on the ground doing stuff. That definitive agreement is not signed yet. I expect at any time. So, Headwater's and Caleb, is out there staking other properties now with the additional money he was able to raise from Rick and I. So, just a really good execution model. They brought Centerra in, the producing company owns 9.9% of the company. And I'm sure Centerra is looking at some of their properties. And so again, I suspect they'll continue to joint venture things out. They're going to have lots of drilling in 2026 and later this year. They'll be drilling the Newmont joint venture here in the next 3, 4 weeks. So again, a lot of drilling to do, good guys, skin in the game, good people. That's what I look for.
Jeff, this company has been really a standout in terms of the partners. And you even mentioned how Centerra came in with an equity stake. And the actually Newmont deal is also interesting because Newcrest initially signed these exploration earn-ins and then Newmont took over Newcrest. Curious how you see this all playing out with Centerra being an equity shareholder, Oceana and Newmont both focused on 3 and 4 different projects, respectively. How do all these majors get along in this one junior company, as it does seem like they have different strategies, some project specific and Centerra equity specific?
Well, I think Newmont's more interested at the project level. They do own a significant number of shares also. I can't remember if that's 5% or thereabouts. But and again, Centerra only owns 9.9. It gets more difficult if someone owns 19.9%. So I like where it sits right now. Oceana Gold does not own an equity interest. It's purely at the project level. At the end of the day, all these companies, unless you're just trying to flip stock and play this, which is half of Canada and the United States, and all these stocks are going up. I'm looking for companies that are really going to make a meaningful discovery, something that's worth a lot of money. So, I see it playing out that, each of these companies has a different interest in Headwater. And at this point, I'd like to see, Newmont's already had success. They've made a discovery on part of the joint venture, and that's got to be drilled off more. But again, I'm looking for a discovery. And if you're asking me if there's going to be a fight down the road, that'd be awesome to buy the company. But right now they got to keep plugging ahead and drilling. Does that help at all?
Yeah, that's helpful, and I think it's nice to see multiple majors in there. It would be nice to see a bidding war down the road, but nice to see companies also validate the pedigree of their exploration team because often Headwater is the operator on these. And so I think it's because of their geology background and their pedigree to find big deals that these majors are so interested in.
Good point, and I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, they are the operator on the Oceana Gold and the Newmont thing, and they get a 10%. So all the money that's spent on those projects, 10% of it goes to the G&A of Headwater. And again, there's different prospect generators. If you have your prospects generated out to juniors with not a lot of cash, that's a big difference than having your prospects generated out to majors that are actually paying you to operate the program. So Headwater is a great case of, again, it's what attracted me to the company. And I've been a shareholder for 3 years. I'm very patient. It's what attracted me to that model. They know how to execute the joint venture model. Doesn't mean they'll make a discovery, but there aren't many companies. There's only probably half dozen companies that I think that operate any better in the prospect generator space.
Well, Jeff, let's also pivot over to another company that was there at the Metals Investor Forum that we spent some time with, and that's Almadex. I know that's another position you're very interested in. We talked a lot with Michelle. This is another prospect generator that's honestly been around for a while, but you were mentioning that they're kind of retooling and refocusing the company. So give us an update on Almadex, traded on the TSXV under the ticker DEX.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it short. I just want to give your listeners a disclosure, though. Number one is that I'm not giving investment advice. Number two, the junior resource market is, if you're not used to that and there's someone listening to this that lives in my hometown, and these are highly risky stocks, you should have a newsletter writer or a professional broker that is in that space that knows what your situation is. I'm just talking about what I do with my own money. I'm a large shareholder in these companies, and I also consult for them as a paid consultant, which again, if the company doesn't work out, that's not going to help me with the number of shares I own. But I want to make sure they're bringing in like-minded shareholders when they do future financing. So I will look at what they're doing and say, well, this is a good shareholder. This might not be a good shareholder. So on the Almadex front, I've been involved with Morgan Polican, who runs Almadex, and his father, Dwayne Polican, very successful. Dwayne's made many discoveries over his career. He's the chairman of the board of Almadex. He's still kicking away, still sharp as a tack, but Morgan runs the operation now. Morgan is a guy that I backed in Mexico that made 3 multi-million ounce discoveries over a 15-year period. Morgan is sort of retooled in the United States. Almadex was a spin out of multiple those discoveries as those got bigger and they became their own companies. Almadex was the company that spun out and had a lot of the assets that they've built up over 20 years, royalties, some joint venture stuff, and some very prospective exploration properties. But Morgan, over the last 3 years, has quietly, how he made those discoveries in Mexico, he's applied that to the Western United States. And I'm not a geologist, so I'm not going to be able to explain it to you very intelligently, but essentially he's looking at these lithocaps that a lot of people have passed over, and really copper porphyries here, copper gold porphyries. That he has a theory that led him to make the discoveries in Mexico that there's a certain type of clay and a certain type of lithocap, and he's quietly staked, I think it's 12 to 14 of these now, and he's still out there doing it. And what's unique about Almadex is because of their success in the past, unlike most junior companies, they're sitting on $20 million in cash and gold, liquid assets, plus some securities from some of the companies that have joint ventured or bought things off of them. So they really have about 40 cents a share in cash, gold, and marketable securities. And that's kind of unheard of in a junior, and the stock is a 60-cent stock. So, but really what Morgan's doing is Morgan's going out to do what he's done before and make a big discovery. It's, he's staking ground. He's not, that's what he does. So the bet there is that, again, I'm backed up by a lot of cash. He owns 6 of his own drill rigs. And I think it was Michelle when we were talking that came up with, when we were talking about, she was telling someone, and I'm sort of stealing that, but, Morgan's a big game hunter. Morgan's, if you're going to go out on a hunting trip, you want a guy who's done it before and found the big game. And back to that roadkill, a lot of these guys are just playing with a sandbox that's already known. Morgan's out there looking for something big. Copper gold porphyries worth tens of billions of dollars, and he owns his own rigs. He literally has, we're drilling our own properties. He can punch 1 or 2 holes into things, unlike other companies that can't sign a small contract with a driller to do that. So I'm betting big on Morgan over the next 3 years. I think I am the largest shareholder, or damn close. And I'm betting really big that he's going to continue his track record of discovery. So I'm a big believer, but again, that's the risk I'm taking.
So the big picture strategy with a lot of these prospect generators is to also turn some of these option agreements or exploration alliances into royalties on projects that get advanced by these majors or whoever is the optionee. This company, Almadex, has 7 royalties, all in Mexico. How much value are you putting on those?
I'm not putting any value. I don't think there's any value in the market. I mean, there's until recently, there wasn't much assigned to more than cash. But again, the royalties in Mexico, there's a lawsuit, and we're not going to get into that all the time, but Almadex has a royalty on that lawsuit that Almaden, the parent company that spun out, is my belief is that over the next 2 years, they're going to get a big settlement, and part of that is going to go to Almadex. There's no guarantee in that, but again, that'd be a whole nother interview of why I think that's an interesting play. But yeah, there's no value to that royalty right now in the company, and it could be worth tens of millions of dollars. And remember, Morgan sold a royalty 4 years ago for $10 million, and that's part of the cash he has. Again, that's what they do.
Well, Jeff, I know there's other prospect generators that you invest in. Any other ones that you want to mention? I know you have a couple other ones in the stable.
Yeah, I mean, briefly, Kincora Copper is a premier Australian prospect generator. When I say Australian, they don't really have prospect generators. It's listed in Canada and Australia, but their properties are predominantly in Australia. And it's another company similar to Headwater that, recently Rick and I wrote checks to, and some other people in the business, and ex big players like Bob Bishop and Van Simmons, and some guys who've been around and tend to give companies time. But I put that deal together because Kincora's got, right now, they've got 4 partners on 4 projects. The main partner is Anglo, the major mining company. And I think right now they have close to a potential spend to earn into those projects of $110 million. So they're drilling now with Anglo. They'll be drilling all next year with Anglo. They have 2 other projects that are going to get drilled next year. The company is very well structured. Again, even though I restructured on a rollback, 40% of the shares were already owned by management and insiders. So when we came in, it's we even put a year hold on our stock, which nobody does in the Canadian markets because we didn't want anybody participating that didn't have it. And I consider that a brief time frame, a year. I'm looking out 2-3 years. I think Kincora can make a big discovery. They're in the Macquarie Arc. They're in some other places there. But again, they've got big partners. It's a massive spend. It's, would rank in one of my top 6 prospect generators that are executing at the highest level. Another company that I'm excited about is Latin Metals, since we're talking about prospect generators. Latin Metals is in Peru and Argentina. They have a couple of joint ventures. One happens to be with Anglo, which they just announced they'll be drilling here in, I can't remember, I think it's this month. If it's not, it's November 1st. I can't remember. They've got another joint venture, very deep pocket, private company that's spending quite a bit of money. and working through the permitting process. It's taken longer in Argentina, which is a little bit surprising. They have a number of other projects, a couple other projects in Argentina that are out for joint venture now, and they have another half a dozen projects in Peru that are, one's drill ready. So I suspect we'll see other joint venture partners. It's probably a little bit, doesn't have as many partners at this point as Kincora and Headwater, but I'm excited about that company, and the chairman of the board owns 40% of the company, fully reporting. He's not making money if the company doesn't execute. So again, in this market, I think that's an interesting speculation.
So, Jeff, from that longer term shareholder standpoint that you have, prospect generator companies, while they're explorers, they're in a different world than a normal one or two asset explorer that tries to discover something and get bought out by a major. That's most people's exit strategy when they're looking at these exploration companies. But prospect generators, they work with a whole lot of other companies. And usually, if one project is successful, as I said, it gets converted into a royalty. So I'm kind of curious, what's your exit strategy when it comes to investing in these prospect generators since they probably won't get bought out?
That's not necessarily true. They can get bought out. They also can sell off, when the asset's discovered, they can sell that and distribute cash to shareholders. So that's another exit strategy. The difference with a prospect generator is, when you're drilling one or two properties, you kind of control your timing, and obviously you have much more risk. But, with a prospect generator, you are working with partners that, when they're majors, they're less enthused to get news out as quickly as a junior, right? So you do have to have a little more patience with the prospect generators. But, again, Rick's done some great interviews, and Matt Geiger out of San Francisco is a big prospect generator believer, and they've had lots of success, and the odds of success go up of making a major discovery and not diluting yourself if you have someone else drilling your projects. So it's a little bit different. But like I said, I've got 4 or 5 companies drilling right now. I mean, I got Quartz Mountain, I got Kingsman, I've got Finex in Finland. These are not prospect generators. So I get the best of both worlds. I'm being patient. I often say I like to have, approximately 12 large positions that are meaningful. I have other positions that are quite large, but 12 companies that I'm trying to consult, and they're meaningful positions and they're longer term plays for me. And again, I'm not just prospect generators, but again, I like the different models.
Well, Jeff, I like that you have that hybrid approach where you're swinging for the fences with true exploration plays, but also taking a diversified approach with the majors funding the drilling in a number of prospect generators. So great to get your thoughts on that particular niche of the resource sector, and always great to get your thoughts in general. So, Jeff, appreciate you coming on the KE Report with us. As always, looking forward to our next conversation.
Thanks for having me, guys. I really appreciate it.